Okay, hitting record.
You have to press continue. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. I'm going to spotlight me. Okay. Welcome to everybody to a meeting of the New York branch of the U.S. chapter of ISPS. And we haven't met in a long time, so we're looking forward to seeing how this goes. And you know, maybe Zoom is the meeting forum of the future for New York as well as for all the rest of the world too. So welcome. And what we're going to do today is have a presentation from Pesach Lichtenberg, and Brian Kohler, the chair of the New York group, will start with a little introduction just to ISPS and ISPS New York, and introduce Dr. Lichtenberg. And then we have time for probably an hour or whatever from Dr. Lichtenberg, and then plenty of time, like 45 minutes or so at the end for questions. Now, we're starting to get kind of a lot of people, so I think people should, we'll see how it goes. We're new to this, but I think people should put their questions in the chat, and then we can find them there. Or Dr. Lichtenberg, did you say that you want people to interrupt you during your presentation?
It would help if somebody was mediating the questions, because
Okay.
I think it'd be a little bit hard for me to concentrate on the presentation and read the chat.
Yeah, we should do that. I think we should do that at the end.
Yeah. Okay, so questions in the chat at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to get us started then. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to unspotlight me and spotlight Brian. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Now, I'm going to share a couple of slides, some slides here. Will they show up?
Well, share your screen.
Let's see.
Yeah.
It showed up. Okay, now I just have to enlarge it.
Start the slideshow.
Is that showing up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so welcome to the New York City branch of ISPS US. It's a group that's been from early on. We started meeting 1996, and then we were meeting at people's offices, and then we grew. So NYU postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, the independent track, co-sponsored our group. So roughly we've been meeting monthly since that 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, except when, you know, we were having travel to ISPS events in other countries. We stopped meeting in person just before the pandemic hit, because of asbestos removal in the space that NYU gave to us. Our membership is open to all who are interested. There's our websites. And as Julie was mentioning, we're going to hear about Soteria House, more on that in a few moments. Soteria House Israel with Dr. Pesach Lichtenberg. But for those of you who are not in ISPS, group was founded in 1956. First meeting was in the French-speaking part of Switzerland at Lausanne. the psychiatric clinic there. It was founded by Gaetano Benedetti. It's a photo he sent me before he had a unfortunate series of strokes, which eventually took his life. He's a co-founder of ISPS with Christian Mula, who was at the psychiatric clinic of Lausanne. We want to remember Anne Louise Silver, who was our first president. She had just recently passed. I put a quote from the Aeneid from Virgil: "The way things are calls for our tears, and mortality touches our hearts." That's Anne doing her needlepoint at our meetings. And that's her giving a talk on Harry Stack Sullivan. This is a book put together by Euro Alanin, Anne Louise Silver, and Manuel Gonzalez de Chavez on 50 years of humanistic treatment of psychosis. This was back in 2006. It's available free online if you search for it, if you put in the title. At least I have hard copies, but I was able to get it free online as well. So for those of you who are not members of ISPS or ISPS US, please consider joining. We have a journal, that's the name, Psychosis. It's edited by John Reed. It's a quarterly, 4 times a year, and you can access it online by contacting Antonia Svensson, who's the ISPS international organizer. We have a very large book series published by Routledge. You might want to check it out on our website. The US, New York City group, the US group did an international conference at Cooper Union back in 2015, From DNA to Neighborhood, Experience and Relationship and Psychosis, International Dialogue. And this is our next meeting. You can go on the isps.org website for the next meeting this coming August through September 4th, 2022, Co-Constructing Healing Spaces in Perugia, Italy. Maurizio Piciccia and his group are hosting. We have international chapters in many countries. We have lots of different topics that we cover. So these are the reasons why to become a member if you're not already, to support the work, to get the journal, participate on listservs, etc. Social networking. So today we're going to talk about Soteria. It's a very important book by Lauren Mosher and Voice Hendricks, who Voice is the cousin of guitarist Jimi Hendrix. Some of you may know that. Through Madness to Deliverance, there's Lauren. Lauren came to visit us at NYU and gave a talk on Soteria House. We met him in various countries. And that's Voice, who is intimately connected with the US when it started out in California, the Soteria houses. And then, of course, in Soteria Bern, Luc Ciampi and his colleagues was the first European Soteria house. It's been going on since for well over 30 years. Now it's in other countries as well, including in Israel, as we'll see. That's a photo of Luc Ciampi. We celebrated his 90th birthday at the Lausanne Psychiatric Clinic where ISPS first started. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Pesach Lichtenberg, who's a psychiatrist and in Israel. And his talk is entitled The Soteria Model as an Alternative to Institutional Care, What We Have Learned in Israel. I'm sure they've learned a lot. That's Pesach. And that's Pesach with someone who he collaborated with in the beginning to start Soteria House. Pesach, is this Avram? Avram?
Yes, that is Avremi, indeed.
Avrami. Okay, thank you. And this is the description of the talk, but we'll just start right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Pesach, and for giving your talk today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
So you could stop sharing.
I
There
did.
you go. All right, now.
Okay. Fine. So thank you, Brian, for the warm introduction, and thank you to ISPS for having me here. For many years, I've been a member here. Long before the first Soteria house in Israel was established, it was hard to even find a place from where I could describe the idea. ISPS always provided me with a platform for that. And I was always deeply appreciative of that, and I still am. So I'd like to tell you about what we've been doing in Soteria in Israel, to describe to you the theoretical background, the arrangements which went into establishing it, and the work we've been doing over the last 5 years, and very importantly, the effect we've been having on the wider mental health care system in Israel. So I'd like to talk about that. My name is Pesach Lichtenberg. I born and bred in Brooklyn. Went to medical school in Einstein in the Bronx, and 1986 I relocated to Israel for many reasons, among them the fact that my name has a ch, and my first name has a ch, and my last name has a ch, and I thought it wouldn't be considerate to stay in a place where that would cause problems to people around me, so I relocated to the Middle East. I did my psychiatric residency in Jerusalem, and shortly thereafter was given the directorship of a closed psychiatric ward. Let me now share screen and go to the lecture here. Now, a lot of thought went into what happened here in terms of setting up Soteria. Obviously, in charge of a closed psychiatric ward, I very much wanted to make it the best possible, most healing place it could be. And I think that the level, the moral level of the people working improved over the years that I was in charge, but I hit up against the strong structural limitations of the hospital. Why do we need hospitals in any medical field? There are two basic reasons. One reason is because you need that concentration of technology, that in one place you can have blood tests and x-rays and MRIs and specialists, and that's very important. It's usually not relevant for psychiatry. The second reason is to quarantine people who are infectious. You want them in one place. You don't want them infecting the general population. I think that that is one of the unspoken, not always conscious reasons why we try to sequester people who are psychotic away from us so that they won't disturb us. And that unfortunately affects psychiatry and is not a good reason at all for the hospitals. And there are many problems with hospitals. I probably don't have to tell the people here the sort of stigma of someone who's been hospitalized and who's ashamed of that. It's amazing when people come to interview for a job with us, and sometimes it turns out they've been hospitalized. They're a little bit ashamed to say that, but our eyes light up. Okay, you understand what we're doing. We're happy to have you with us. And the worst part of stigma is the internalized kind of stigma, where someone who's hospitalized will often feel he's come to sort of the worst possible situation. What does this mean about who he is? There's the alienation of the of the psychiatric ward, where there's so little social contact between the staff and the people receiving treatment, and it's not a friendly place to be. The passivity of being told what to do. Over half a century ago, Erwin Goffman spoke about the total institution, and in some ways, it's still a place where you lose control over your life. Obviously, I'm talking generalizations here. There are better hospitals, or there are more difficult places to be, but still, recent research has shown that a majority of people going through a psychiatric hospitalization consider it to be a traumatic experience. And over a third, actually, when evaluated by the standard diagnostic questionnaires for PTSD, rated as having that diagnosis. We don't want that somebody in the most stressful time has to be re-traumatized. And the problem of revolving door, I know that in Israel, the statistics are that someone who's released from hospitalization, 20% chance that he will return within a month, 50% chance within a year. This also shows something inadequate about the treatment. Certainly, this is at the heart of what ISPS is all about. Medication is too central a part of the treatment program. It shouldn't be. There's so much more that needs to be done. That's what the psychosocial and ISPS is all about, obviously. Part of this is a neglect of human rights. Now, the problems with the hospital are very well demonstrated, I think, by where I worked for the 25 years that I ran a closed ward. I'd like to show you the area in Google Earth. This is where I worked. Where exactly? Well, let me describe to you the neighborhood. This is the huge municipal cemetery, actually a necropolis on the outskirts of Jerusalem. This is a municipal garbage dump where there was a steady traffic of garbage trucks unloading their wares. And down here in the valley, there was a shooting range where you could have here a background, an auditory background of shots being fired, which is not the ideal environment for people who may have certain persecutory inclinations, and who exactly are they shooting at. But this accomplished the mission of quarantining, so to speak, the people who are psychotic, keeping them away. And here's my office right in the middle of that, where I could report to work every morning. I think this is a very stark geographical illustration of the place where madness has in our society, far away, on the edge, not something which you want to acknowledge or allow to be part of what we do and where we are. Now, if part of the opposition to this kind of thought certainly precedes R.D. Laing, but R.D. Laing is sort of the spiritual guru of Soteria homes. He had a forerunner to these homes in Kingsley Hall in London in the 1960s, which was a place where people would come to live, and some of them were artisans, and some of them were professionals, and some of them had hardcore psychiatric problems. The late Joseph Burke was there with him. He passed away just about half a year ago. I'm very sorry about that. He visited us in Jerusalem once. And the idea of R.D. Laing, and when I had psychiatric residents in the hospital, I would make them read The Divide itself as the first thing that they read. The basic idea was that there is a certain sense behind the madness, that there is something being communicated which we're losing if we don't listen to these people. And R.D. Laing's empathy and understanding certainly are legendary. And Lauren Mosher, the psychiatrist who was mentioned earlier, who set up the first Soteria home in California in the 1970s, Soteria being a Greek word meaning meaning salvation. And in Israel, we were very careful to maintain the name Soteria so that no one would know what it means. If we would call it a salvation home, we would get many messianic sects, which are quite prominent these days, especially in Jerusalem, which is a draw. But we wanted to serve all citizens. So Lauren Mosher came to this house, and he decided to try to do something a little bit more orderly, and he set up the first Soteria home in 1972. This was funded by the government because Lauren Mosher was the head of the schizophrenia chair, and that's what they called it back then. In the NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, which sort of sets the world agenda for psychiatric research. Unlikely that someone like that will get the job in the near future, but he had it then, and this place was funded, and with the second home which he set up, Eneman, backwards for no name, and these two homes in San Jose operated for 12 years, and it was a wonderful place where Lauren Marshall was trying to make the point that we don't have to rush to give medication. It was a very conscious anti-psychiatric bent, anti-psychiatric in the sense of not of wanting to be able to give the person a chance to work through his psychosis and not to be treated. People were not treated there. People were just being there, and being with indeed was the only therapeutic principle in Soteria, to try to non-judgmentally be with the person who's going through the psychosis. He had very good findings about the results of this place. We'll talk about that later. I take a picture. This is a photograph I took of Soteria Bern, which is the longest lasting Soteria home, a single home in Bern, integrated into the system. Since 1984, it's been operating. If the California Soteria had almost no professional staff and no structured therapeutic sessions, and for the first 6 weeks of an average stay of 5 or 6 months, medication was forbidden. In the Soteria Bern, on the other hand, people get medication. They still have very long shifts of 48 hours, and it's a very well-run place, which has been operated, which Luke Champy set up, as Brian mentioned. You might say that Soteria, and there are many different kinds, many different places, sort of has a left wing and a right wing. The left wing is against meds. The right wing won't have a problem with using medication, of course, with consent, unless you'd use in a hospital. The left wing has an unprofessional staff. The right wing will use more professionals, and the left wing will have no formal psychotherapy at all. The right does. We're somewhere in the middle, as I shall show you soon. And just say one more word about the background. When I started in the 1980s, when I started my work in psychiatry, I was very much a believer in biological psychiatry. I was very much one of those people who said biological psychiatry is the only kind of psychiatry. And I eagerly awaited the next generation of medication. And I eagerly awaited the next findings in the brain sciences and in genetics. And indeed, genetics and the brain sciences have made extraordinary strides over the last 35 years since I've been a psychiatrist. All of that has translated into no clinical benefit for the people we're trying to help. And that certainly was an important impetus in trying to look for alternatives. Now, you saw the photos of the Soteria homes. You saw where my hospital was. I was very happy when we set up our first Soteria home. This was in September 2016, approximately 5 years, 2 months, and 20 days and 4 hours ago that we said that we opened up the doors. It took 11 years of planning to be able to set this up, because everyone said it's a great idea. Nobody was able to fund it. We were determined that this be part of public funding, and I'll get back to what that means in the context of the Israeli mental health care system. In the end, we opened it up mainly with the support of philanthropy. Tauber Foundation supported us, some private donors, and we started working. As you can see, in the very first place, it's in the center of town. You are not only are you not near a cemetery here, but you are in a very desirable residential area near the trolley, near the old city, near the center of town with its festivals and stores. And this is the entrance to the place, and this is one of the bedrooms, and you have an amazing living room with a 4 meters, a 13-foot ceiling, and people meet and talk, and it's a home, and it's a great place to be there. The first year that we set up shop, and at that point, it was unregulated. I mean, the Ministry of Health did not approve this, and our first year was the underground year. It was a wonderful year because, as I told my staff then, we'll have 1,000 soterias for 1,000 years. It'll never be as much fun as the unregulated year when we can just work and do what seems right to us and nobody can tell us what to do. But we knew that the plan was not to set up a single home, was not to set up a boutiques which can be afforded by the rich only. The idea was to become a part of the mental health care system. And that meant that we had to get recognition by the Ministry of Health with all that entails. And it took a year. It was a difficult year during which it was difficult in the sense that we knew we were taking risks. As a high-ranking lawyer who specializes in suing doctors, shared with me his learned pro bono written opinion that when anything goes wrong, as inevitably it will, the staff and we will pay with our license, with our property, with our liberty. So we took some risks this first year. And after a year, which is very fast by the pace of government agencies, we received full recognition by the Ministry of Health, meaning that we became legitimate, meaning that we started to be inspected, meaning that we couldn't make decisions on our own. This was the deal which we made with ourselves. It was a strategic sense that this is what's necessary in order to become a part of this system and to influence it, as we have, and I will talk about that. It allowed, we set up a second home, a women's home, in another area of Jerusalem, also a lovely place. And subsequently we set up a third home in Kfar Yona, which is north of Tel Aviv. The first home was a men's home, the second home was a women's home. This is a mixed home. As you can see here also, these are houses. These are not institutions in any sense. And no less important, we also, on the basis of this government regulation, we spurred the founding of more homes. I will talk about them later briefly, but there are now, based on the regulations which were set up for our homes, there are now 12 homes functioning. They're not all Soteria, but they're certainly a lot more like us than they are like a hospital. And it's wonderful. And there are so many more homes planned. Now, with all the different Soteria homes, what makes it still remain a Soteria? I think that the most basic idea of Soteria is something very important, which for some people will be obvious, and for others will be opposed to many things that they have learned and the way they practice. And the simple idea is that every state, including the extreme emotional states, which as psychiatrists, as mental health care workers, we treat, these are human problems demanding humane responses. It is such a simple idea, but everything that we do is derived from this simple idea. Now, even though it's obvious, it's not obvious if, like I am, you're a psychiatrist coming from a strong psychobiological background. I remember the first time I heard one of my teachers during my residency training explain to me that after seeing someone who's psychotic, that it's the person isn't talking, it's his dopamine speaking. And that sounded to me like an insight at the time. But afterwards, it became clear to me that the dopamine is always speaking, as well as the other neurotransmitters. But it's not the brain which is suffering, it's the person. And it's on that level we have to try to understand the people who come to us to get help. Now, based on the simple idea, the rest of our work is derived. First of all, it's a home, not an institution. That first year when people would come because there was this rumor that something is going on, something interesting. And I remember the people walking in, looking at our amazing living room and saying, I don't understand, but I would also be willing to live here. And I would say, that is the point. These things are so obvious, but they weren't at the time. The staff we choose is based on who they are and not what they know. And this is very important, especially when it comes to the companion staff. Now, the companions, most of the staff are companions. These are non-professional people. Many of them are students in related professions, some are in unrelated professions. Many of them have their own psychiatric background. Brian mentioned the story of my partner, and he showed the photo of Remy, who had been hospitalized with me in my department 15 years before that, 12 years before that. In fact, the same month that I wrote my first protocol of what I want to do, he came in a catatonic messianic state, which, to make a long and fascinating story short, I quickly got him out of it by a religious ritual, and not knowing that subsequently he would become my most important partner in everything that I did. So that was a good forerunner of our ideas, and the companions are the heart of what we do, in the sense that they make or break the house. They are the people who are there with the residents who are staying and getting help. They are the ones who listen. They are the ones who are with the people in trouble. Since they are not professionals, they get a lot of supervision, mainly group supervision, also individual supervision, and it's very challenging work, very challenging, but they do it. It's repeatedly inspiring to see the kind of work and devotion which they apply to the job. And we work within a therapeutic community, meaning that the community is the treatment. I hasten to add that every house, because or as part of government regulation, every Soteria home and the other homes which came up following our establishment has a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist and a social worker. In addition, we like psychodramatists. They're very they blend in very well with the kind of work that we do. We have students and volunteers, but again, the main thing is the companions and the therapeutic community, where the surrounding is actually an important part of the work that we do. As in every therapeutic community, where there's a flattening of the hierarchy, people share their lives with each other and talk about what's going on. And sometimes people come and ask me, like, what do you do in the home? In fact, I remember in like 2005, when I made the first program, I remember someone asking me, so what are you going to do in this home when you set her up? And I didn't know what to answer. I don't know, I guess we'll be nice to everyone. 8 years later, I finally got an audience with the head of the Ministry of Health. And I presented to him the plan, and he said, so tell me, what are you going to do all day with these people? And 8 years had passed. My answer was no better. I said, well, we'll do things, and it'll be kind of nice, I guess. Today, when we get someone new coming in, and it's usually the family who asks, what do you do here all day? And by now, I know what to answer. I look them in the eye and I say, nothing. The idea is that even though we do a lot of things, I mean, they do set up meals together, and there are usually 2 house meetings a day, and a lot of psychodrama I mentioned, and sometimes there's yoga. The women's home once had, used to have belly dancing lessons, which they never let me partake in. And things happen, but that's not the point. The point is when the person by himself in the sort of supported environment, internal safe space, which he's able to establish when he's surrounded by all of the supportive staff, he's able to rethink what his problem is with himself, with his environment. The key meeting could happen at 2 a.m. He's not able to fall asleep, and he has a talk with one of the companions, and that is often the best part. Yeah, a therapeutic community. And in this little photo, there's someone who's not in the photo, didn't know whether to come in or not. He saw that the door was locked and didn't want to enter, so he had an impromptu house meeting about whether the door should be locked or not. And after an hour, as happens in too many of our meetings, we did not reach any solid conclusion, but the person realized that he can trust us and come in. The basic idea in Jerusalem parlance of being with, which Lauren Mosher called correctly the primary principle of Soteria, it's a very well-known Hasidic story. I'm always happy to say this outside of Israel, because I find a new audience of people who might not know the story. Very briefly, the king's son, the prince, goes out of his mind, thinks he's a turkey, and goes under the table, takes off his clothes, and starts pecking at crumbs on the floor. None of the doctors can help. Then the wise man comes and says, "Give me a chance." Okay, nothing to lose. The king is at wit's end. And the wise man takes off his clothes and goes under the table and starts pecking at crumbs. And the prince says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm a turkey. What are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm also a turkey." And so they peck at crumbs for a while. And the wise man says, "Listen, we can be a turkey and get dressed. I know a lot of turkeys who are around us and they're dressed and they get dressed. These crumbs aren't so good. Let's get a real meal." "Okay." And then my back is hurt. Let's sit down. And he manages to get him up to sit at the table. And then the story ends and then he was cured. And it's not clear what really helped him. It used to trouble me, what cured him over here? So was he still a turkey? In Soteria, I understood that's not really a question. If the person is able to function, to be in a better place in his life, I don't have to diagnose him not as schizophrenia, not as turkey, just sort of try to be able to help him for whatever point that he is. And sometimes we say, "Has he been turkeyed?" "No, I turkeyed him yesterday. Don't worry about it." And in Hebrew, this works out very well in the verb form. Soteria is sort of a container which allows many different kinds of techniques within this turkey principle. And of course, we respect the dignity of people. We use medication less. That's an important part. And that may be a little bit different from some of the other houses, but all of the houses use less. Even when I was still running the department, I was able to say that the medication that we give, about half of it is to calm the person who's receiving the medication, and half of it is to treat the staff, the anxieties of the staff. So we don't give that second half, and sometimes we give a lot less or not at all, and I'll show you some statistics about that later. This is the only institutional hint within the home, the medication, and some of the very sharp knives for making salad, which are locked in a drawer. Okay. I can tell you that the house, the way that we deal with people is so refreshing, is so inspiring at times. One of our homes went into COVID lockdown a couple of times. And what we had to do then is, for a week, none of the residents could leave the home, and we needed staff who quickly volunteered to also stay for a whole week in the home. No one could enter or leave except 4 staff members who were there for a week. 3 of them volunteered because they were unmarried. The 4th one, they were single, and the 4th one volunteered because he was married. And at the end of the week, the staff was euphoric. Like, I finally got to know the people. And you know, this guy who wouldn't leave his room, he left his room. Like, he became a part of the activities. Let's do more of these week-long shifts. It was just so wonderful to see, and such a contrast to what I knew was happening in many of the institutions, where you had COVID wards, which were terribly, terribly alienating. Now, who are the people who come to get help with us? They require hospitalization. We're not talking here about people who could go to day programs or other such things. We're talking about people who need to be in an environment where they get help 20 or around the clock, and they come to us. They have to be consenting on the admission interview. It's always done in a very egalitarian sort of way, in that the purpose of this interview is that you can know us and we can know you. Sometimes they interview us, sometimes we interview them. At the end of it, if we think that we can help and they think they want to be with us, then they're invited to come in. And if not, then we never try to convince them or pressure them in any way. They have to take responsibility. If people who are very immediately looking to commit suicide, then we have a problem taking them, because there are too many ways of doing that in a home such as ours. And so some of the people who come in are violent. We need to feel that there's some sense that they will refrain from that while they're with us. And obviously, this is not always successful. You can't always anticipate this sort of thing. And we also do not allow drug use, but it's not like we're checking anybody's urine. There was one person who I remember was for so long we weren't like making any advance with him. He had a long, rich history of drug use. And at some point I said, listen, I'm sorry. Like, I approached him in the patio. He was smoking a cigarette. And I said, listen, I'm sorry, but we're not making progress, and I have some doubts. We're going to do a urine test, okay? And he took another puff on a cigarette, and then he looked at me and he said, Pesach, I'm really disappointed in you. And we did the test, and it was negative. That was the first and last urine test I've done, which doesn't mean that we're not going to set up at some point a comorbidity home with some kind of psychiatric problem and drug use and make that a part of it. I don't know yet, but that's what the story is right now. What happened, a few statistics about our homes, you can get some sense. This is a summary from 2020. Of the 3 homes we were operating, 237 people entered 276 times. The average stay was 35 days. Now, in the original Soteria was supposed to half a year. Current institutional psychiatric stay in the States is about a week. Nevertheless, this is some computation some people on the West Coast of the States made for me. A month in Soteria will be cheaper than a week in a hospital, based on the staffing patterns which we use. After 35 days, we try to get people in touch with the available rehab services. We'd like to set up some of these on our own, and we do have some aftercare services which we've started to provide, with a stress on the community services, a stress on the community feeling which Soteria has. So we have support groups and things like that. The average age of people coming in, a wide range, but the average age were younger people. And then it's all relative, people in their lower 30s.
אין בעצם צבא, צבא זה רצועה. רגילה, רק מי.
Somebody's talking Hebrew and you go to mute. Less than 3% of the people who came in because of an outbreak of violence or not wanting to be with us or presenting a danger, we had to transfer them for an involuntary hospitalization. we always take that hard as a kind of a failure. Most soterias have been like 8 to 10%. And we're 3%. We've gone down. Either we're getting better or we're not challenging ourselves enough, but that's the situation. The diagnosis is similar to the mix in a psychiatric ward. People are psychotic or manic. I want to be very clear that we don't use diagnoses at all within the house. But when we write to the regulator or to the insurance people, we have to speak the language, and then we do. But it's not a part of what's happening in the house. I'm always careful about that, because diagnosis is not something you have. We're talking about how people are dealing with their lives. A lot of people are, especially the women, have complex PTSD, and the other diagnoses are less presented there. And we'll talk about public pay. I said in the beginning we were mainly supported by philanthropy. By now we've become public pay, and I'll say a little bit more about that soon. I mentioned that other houses have been set up. These are not strictly Soteria homes, but they're good places which also take people who need to be hospitalized, and they're established after us. They're doing a wonderful work. This is in Kibbutz up north. This is in Rehovot, south of Tel Aviv. This is in Carmiel, a city in the north. This Bet Mesacha is an Arab-speaking home, and this is a place in Ashdod, and there are more homes. Now, do we help? Let me show you some data. For all the houses, not just ours, we can see a real reduction in the number of admissions and the amount of time spent in the hospital in the year before coming in compared to the year after coming in. The savings, the financial savings, are long-term in terms of less of a revolving door. It's a preliminary research which we're hoping to improve. We also have findings. This is something which was led by my partner, Remy, who is now a doctoral student in clinical psychology. And this is a graph which prospective data comparing stigma before and after in a hospital, in online care, computerized online care, and in Soteria. And you can see how much less stigma there is. This is on a self-stigma scale for people who are in Soteria. The numbers are not big enough to reach statistical significance, but I'm sure when we get more numbers that it will. And it makes sense. In Soteria, there cannot be stigma, because so many of the people on the staff have their own psychiatric backgrounds. Because someone who comes into a Soteria home, including me, if I haven't been there for a week or two, will have trouble identifying who here is getting help, who here is giving help. Some of the people who got help are now giving help, and vice versa. So the stigma is a sign of disgrace. There cannot be a sign when there is no disgrace, as it happens in the Soteria homes. Do we use less medication? Well, I don't have comparison data, but I can show you what happens with the people in one of our homes, and our first home, people who are psychotic. Of the people who started their stay with us without antipsychotics, these are people with a diagnosis of psychotics, of psychosis. Upon leaving, 2/3 of them were still without antipsychotics, if they came in without. And those who came in with, 100% of those, 100% came in with, for this group of 65. So 17% remained without, left without antipsychotics, even though they entered with. And if you look specifically at people without prior hospitalizations, obviously as a subgroup. So here also you see that those entering without, most of those who came in without antipsychotics left without antipsychotics. And for some of those with, they came off of it. Now, the work without treating psychosis without antipsychotics is not conventional treatment. And we don't coerce it on anyone, but we also don't coerce medical use on people. Recently, we had somebody who came to us, he wasn't even considered psychotic, but in the comfortable environment of Soteria, he was able to divulge the full range of his messianic ambitions and his Davidic descent from King David, that is, and his high status in some very secret security operations. The best thing that I did for him was to take off three antidepressants which he was receiving, and the man became for the first time was really in contact with us, and he was on a small dose of antipsychotics, 3 milligrams of risperidone. I increased it to 4, very small change. And when he left after 6 weeks with us, his doctor called to say, what did you do to bring this man back to his family and to bring him back to his life? We did a lot of work with him also about what's more important, to save your people or to be with your family, and we were really able to help him. Other soterias have also had favorable research findings in terms of symptom reduction, similar to what happens in a hospital treatment. Symptom reduction is not the point ever in Soteria. The point is to help a person live better, be happier, to achieve or to strive for some real recovery. The experience of people in Soteria is more positive than in a hospital. That should surprise nobody. I hope that we'll be getting some of our own data on that. Soteria, as we said, causes less stigma and medications in smaller quantities, and the psychosocial rehabilitation, which means the ability of a person to resume his life, if you look 2 years down the line, is better for people who've left Soteria, completed a stay at Soteria. This finding goes back to Lauren Masher. And it's very exciting to see the change that is happening. I said the first home in 2016, within a year, the Ministry of Health supported us. In 2018, public funding came in. I want to say a word about public funding. By now, most of the people coming into us are publicly funded. Israel, like all civilized countries, has universal healthcare insurance. Now, it works that there are 4 large HMOs, which are funded by a tax, and every citizen belongs to one of the 4. We've signed with 2 of them. All of the 4 have signed with some of the houses which have been established, and we haven't yet reached parity with the hospital. In a hospital, someone has to come in, you take them in, and you notify the HMO, the Kupat Cholim, that the person has come in, and you have to start paying us for the care. There's some kind of inspection to see that things are done properly. We're not yet at that stage. I still need the approval of the HMO before I can take the person in. It's still sort of a pilot status, but it's making great strides, and it's been wonderful working with them in that I see how the professionals in the Israeli HMOs, they're with us. They really want to advance this model and make it a sound, make it an integral part of the mental health care system alongside hospitalizations. I'm very careful not to say as an alternative to, because I don't want people to call us an alternative. We are very much mainstream. I'm a professor of psychiatry in Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I am a card-carrying member of the Israel Psychiatric Association, and we are mainstream. And I mentioned the 12 homes which already exist. Why do they get public funding? Why do they bother funding us? Because there's popular demand. I remember the first year we would wait for the telephone to call. And if someone called, Remy would go to the north, go to the south to try to pick up the person. You can pay, no problem. How wonderful if you're willing to spend time with us in this proof of concept time. But by now, all of the houses, certainly the ones which are supported by some of the HMOs, they are full. And people want this. I mean, who wouldn't prefer to be in a home environment as opposed to being in an institution? The costs per day are slightly cheaper than a hospital, but we also anticipate there'll be less revolving door, and the long-term savings will be even more substantial. And of course, there's disillusionment with the system. So we're pleased about that. We still have to work with better integration with other community services, finding the right partners. We've had some disappointments where people who did well with us had trouble becoming a part of some of the subsequent rehabilitation services of shared housing and so on and so forth, of sheltered housing. But we hope to advance that. So we're trying to develop other services like a community emergency room, doing more home visits, crisis teams, and so on and so forth, where people will remain in a place which has the sorts of sensitivities which Soteria does. And we want to set up more homes and still more homes. One of my minor public relations successes has been to get the Ministry of Health to talk about the goal of 130 homes. It's a very crass sort of calculation which I made, that Israel requires 130 homes in order to reach the full potential of care. And I hope that we will achieve that. I expect that eventually we will. Certainly in the moment that the HMOs provide full support, we'll be able to reach that goal. And to go from 0 to 12 homes is much harder than to go from 12 to 130. And I expect that in the USA that there'll also be homes like this. I know the psychiatrist Donald Ross in Washington State, who actually brought me to lecture to NAMI, something I've never done before. And he's trying to set up there a Soteria home with public funding. I know that there are various other initiatives underway. Some have been in touch with me. I encourage everyone here to set one up near their home. I'll be happy to offer advice. And it's been wonderful to sense that we've actually changed the way things happen. When the relatively new Minister of Health unveiled in the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, his plan for mental health care services, and he's put a refreshingly strong emphasis on improving mental health care services. So these kinds of homes featured on about half of the slides of his PowerPoint presentation. So things have really changed from what they were. We've really become a part of the system and had an influence on the system. And I wish I could tell Oren Moshe, who I never had the privilege of meeting, about this. And there's also a question about whether, assuming that some people will not cooperate, many people will not, and they don't want to be not in the hospital, not with us, is there a possibility of going into a closed ward, a forensic ward, and even though people are kept there even against their will, to still provide them as well with the kind of sensitivity, kind of respect which we have managed to cultivate in our Soteria homes. So that's our story, and that's my email at the bottom if anyone wants to contact me. And I'm very happy to have had the chance to present this. And I will be just as happy to answer questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Is dat dan een sympathieke man, zeg? Jeetje. Heel leuk. Ik vond dat al direct als we de summit.
So,
I'm
okay,
hearing.
we have, yeah, there was unmuting. We have lots of time for a dialogue and Q&A. Could each person, Julie, what do you think? Could each person, I have a list of who's made comments from the beginning. So could each person, if they want, ask the question? So we can hear their voice and,
Yeah, you could call on them.
Okay. well, Satu had asked for Pesach's email and he just provided it.
I'll put it in the chat as well so that people can have it.
Good. And then Adina wanted to know, you touched on it, Pesach, about working with people who are feeling suicidal, who are, you had.
Yes.
Want to elaborate on that? Adina, do you want to add something?
uh, Not in particular. I'm just wondering how you deal with people who are feeling very self-destructive and have some risk, a suicidal risk.
Okay. Obviously, you can't do this kind of work without running up against
Yes.
some serious suicidality. If we, as I said in the beginning, if we think that somebody has decided they want to put an end to their life and that they're not really cooperating, then the place isn't with us. Because we're home and we're not able to help in that kind of situation, which can cause, well, what we do short of that, sometimes we have intense supervision so that we have somebody be with the person. You can do that for half a day, 2 days, but it's not really compatible with staying in the home beyond that. But what's clear is that, like everything else, when someone wants to die, the reaction isn't, oh no, you mustn't, though we don't want anyone to take their lives, obviously. But it's, oh, you must be in terrible distress. Let's talk about that. In other words, there is a place within the home for talking about everything, and that certainly includes talking about a sense that I don't want to be here anymore. We have had tragedies. There was a situation. This might not happen in the States where the law is a bit different. In Israel, you cannot hospitalize somebody who is not psychotic, even if he's suicidal. And there was a woman who came to us after a suicide attempt, but she seemed to be beyond that and assured us that it wasn't happening anymore. But after a couple of weeks, the overwhelming urge came back, and we couldn't hospitalize her because she was not at all psychotic. And the law is very clear here that the person is allowed to end his life. And even if you can say it's a passing phase and just help her get past this, it doesn't matter. Hospitalizing her was not an option. Sending her home so she could commit suicide, not with us, was not a fair option. And so all that was left was to try to be with her and watch her. And she took advantage of some disruption one evening to hop over the fence, and her body was found the next day. So, you know, it was very difficult circumstances, and of course it was very hard for the staff, and we worked on that. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to take anyone who's suicidal. We just have to be very careful about that.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Rachel was next. Rachel, do you want to, you had mentioned something about substance misuse, I think, or the population when Pesach was talking about that, and something about having a kosher Soteria home in New York.
I'm in.
Rachel, did you
Yeah,
want?
hi.
uh,
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if there, people that are psychotic are usually violent and suicidal. Like, what kind of presentation do you have? What kind of people come into your house if they're not any of these, you know?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't accept the premise. I don't think most people who are psychotic are violent. Research would suggest that there's a serious problem with psychotic people who also use drugs, but otherwise people who are psychotic shouldn't, that's part of the stigma, to assume that they're violent. They're much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence. But
I mean, my question is more like someone that's, has a manic episode, or, there's just so, yeah.
manic episode, people who are, high energy, they are much more of a challenge than people who are psychotic, because our boundaries are not firm, nothing like the thick door of the closed ward, and we have to try to be able to work with these people. And they want to go out, so we'll send one of our companions to walk around and hope that they come back within a reasonable time. We've had people, companions, running a few miles together with them in order to get some of the energy out. It can be very tiring, and a disproportionate proportion of the people who we have ended up hospitalizing involuntarily have been people who have been manic and who we felt were real danger that the house could not contain, and who they did not want us to contain them. But certainly psychotic people, I mean, we have someone now, it's very hard to see how his thought processes are disintegrating, and we're trying very hard to help him by being with him, like the other evening, I thought I'd have to go in to see what can be done, and we've started him on medication. Certainly, I shouldn't say certainly, but we have, 35 days the average stay. He's supported by one of the HMOs, which doesn't give us more than 45 days. It's not like we can just let him work through this. These are the compromises which need to be made. He's on medication. I'm not going to apologize for it. And what helped most was that evening, in the house meeting, everybody gave him a chance to talk about his distress, and he was, and the companions reported to me just how coherent he was, and how he was able to talk about all kinds of things that happened to him. And too early to say that it was a turning point, but this is the way we help. We listen. The assumption is that someone who's psychotic is trying to convey something of importance to us. It might be something which happened in the past. Often I've had a sense that some people need to be psychotic in order to be able to express some horror of their existence. With this person who I mentioned, at some point when he told one of our companions to turn over and bend down, to turn around and bend down, there was suddenly a sense that he was trying to reenact in a reversal of roles some things which he had suffered from. And this is a kind of sensitivity which we try to provide as a person goes through these very, very difficult states. It's like Soteria was originally established to treat psychosis. We are trying to replace, as far as possible, hospitalizations for any reason. So it's not just psychosis, but there is something about psychosis which fits best the approach in Soteria in terms of letting the person express himself in a place of support. The violence in the beginning of your question is rarely the issue.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I was just wondering, anyone in New York that's like has this idea? Because it's such like I'm so blown away by this. I would love to get in touch with you.
The answer is yes. There are people who are very actively working on it, but the decision was made not to talk about it until things get a little further along. If you send me an email, I'll be happy to share some more details.
Okay, thank you.
Pesach, next, Tamar, who presented on her work at our group on a mobile crisis unit. She's a psychiatrist on using open dialogue, which I think you use too, right? Principles of open dialogue, right? At Soteria, Israel.
Yeah, sure.
Tammy, I think she may want to ask.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm recovering from a root canal. So this isn't it's not the best moment to be on video, but I did want to
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay. I just wanted to I was just commenting that in Israel, where the system essentially pays for everything, that I've always been curious. I've always wanted to somehow weave in the cost of medications into these all the different projects that use fewer medications, because that contributes to the overall cost of someone's treatment. So that was more of a comment. And the other thing that really resonated with me in your presentation, Pesach, was that the map that you showed at the beginning, because I trained in medical school in Israel. And when we had to go to our psychiatry rotations, the hospitals were actually like not on the map. There were like blank spaces on the map that we were directed to. And like when you got there, it was clear where you were, but it's just I guess it's an upsetting, it's upsetting to know that the same is of course repeated here in the States or in Canada too, where I'm from originally, and that if we think of prisons and jails as the largest psychiatric hospitals that we have, they're almost always on poisoned or fracked land, and they're totally isolated, hard to get to, impossible to find, and it's just a heavy and painful realization, and also like a really beautiful thing to see how integrated the Soteria homes in Israel are.
Tamar, did you do your rotation with me by any chance?
I was a teleshomer, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a relatively good place in the central area.
Yes.
That's a general hospital. It's not a psychiatric hospital, so it's a different story, but that's a minority of beds in Israel. Good to see you again. We've met on other Zooms. Medication is a very marginal part of the cost of treating somebody. 80 or 90% of costs, over 80% of costs are manpower. The way that we manage to have a lot more people present, listening, helping, supporting than in a hospital is because we have a lot less professional staff, especially a lot less nursing staff. Instead of having around-the-clock nursing, which is very expensive, a home, and this is one of my successes in helping write the government regulation for these homes, there's only a 25%, a quarter-time nurse is all that the house requires. She's wonderful, but that's all that we have. We don't need more than that, and that is a huge cost savings. Yes, that's the way it works. And as far as what you describe about people, about how hospitals are out of the way, Yeah, well, the point is right on target, and that is a statement of the place of madness in our society. We don't want it there in any guise, in any way.
Danielle Canafo is with us, and she wanted to ask you something about the recording. So we're going to post the recording, Julie, to everyone, or to?
Well, to be determined, but I believe we can post it on the US YouTube channel eventually.
Yeah.
So we'll try and do that.
And we'll send the link and everything for that. She also wanted to ask you, Danielle, do you want to ask Pesach about the staff companion ratio? And
yeah, I had two questions. So one of them just continues what you were just talking about with the nurses. Could you just break down the staffing and the staff to resident ratio, day what their shifts are, day shift, night shift, just so I have a sense of who's in the house at the time that's there to help or to companion or to give, you know, can you break that down?
Of course. I'll say the regulations. I'll say a little bit extra that we have in Soteria. And I'll also be happy to send a table for if any of you want to set up your own Soteria homes. And if it could be helpful, I can send you what we do in Israel. But every home for 10 people receiving care will have a staff of. The companions, you have 3 during the day and 2 at night. They do with us 12-hour shifts. I prefer that it will be longer shifts, but there are legal and financial obstacles to that. So you have 3 during the day, 2 at night. In addition to that, there is a house mother or house father who works almost full time. There is the director of the house, which is a mental health care professional working half-time. In addition, there's a psychiatrist with us. The Ministry of Health requires about 2 hours, 4 times a week. We have 20 hours a week of a psychiatrist. And of course, all the houses have psychiatrists on call. So if necessary, they can rush in, which happens most in Soteria homes, because some of the other Soteria homes have a much stronger rehabilitation bent from people who are very much oriented in that way. What can I do? My background is a closed ward, and I need to have psychotic people around me who are not yet up to a rehabilitation level in order to feel at home, I guess. So we have half-time psychiatrists plus on-call. Then non-medical healthcare professionals, clinical psychologists and social worker, and possibly others like psychodramatists and so on, the cumulative total of 2.0 people, that's FTEs, I think it's called in English, full-time equivalents. And a quarter-time nurse, I mentioned that. Yeah, I think I said it all. I think I didn't forget anybody. But what it means is during the day on 10 people, you can have the 3 companions, the house father, the psychiatrist, and the social worker are roaming about. The psychologist will sometimes serve also as sort of a case manager and therapist and group therapist, but can also sometimes be used with a strong emphasis on supporting the companions, accompanying the companions. And that's very important that the companions feel comfortable and supported. That is essential in these homes, essential.
So they're companions to the companion.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Melaveha melavim in Hebrew.
So I had one other question about psychoanalysis. I'm a psychoanalyst, Brian is too, perhaps a few other people here. I'm wondering how, and I was, I lived in Israel as a psychoanalyst. how has the psychoanalytic community responded to the Soteria homes? Has there been involvement or even questioning of it? What has been the dialogue there?
There has been a dialogue. I've been invited to the Psychoanalytic Society in Tel Aviv to present what we do. The head of our home in Kfar Yona is a Lacanian analyst who wrote in the past an article about psychoanalysis in the closed ward, and now he's doing it in his home. Not that there's any sort of actual psychoanalysis going on, but the insights are very much drawn by that, are very much colored by the insights of analysis. I mean, I remember a particularly abusive, almost violent resident who would enjoy disparaging others. And I remember him once passing by me in the living room and saying, "No, you useless person, what have you done for me? How have you helped me at all?" And I said, and for some reason Winnicott came to my mind at that time. I said, "What have I done? I'm still here. That's what I've done." And like he nodded and said, "Yeah, you have a point there." So that's not psychoanalysis. You know, it's a passing Soterian encounter in the living room, but that's the way we think. There's probably more which could be done, and if and when you come back to Israel, I'll be happy to think about that some more.
Yeah. Well, the home in Quebec also has a Lacanian approach to working with the psychotic residents there.
Lacan and psychosis go well together. I have trouble understanding both of them, but I haven't given up on either.
That's why they go well together.
Danielle has written so many books, and she has led a program at her university on working in this area, and she's done a lot for the field. 388, we went up and interviewed the people. They have a crisis bed on the top of their home. I don't know if you've been there, Pesach. It's up in Quebec City, in the neighborhood. It's a lovely place. And the people we talked to who were participating said they really appreciated having that opportunity rather than going to the psych hospital. So they had like upstairs, I forget how many beds. Ludi, who's the head of ISPS, has made the next comments on a soft room as in Soteria Burn. She wanted to ask you about that and about more about the role of the psychiatrist. Ludi?
And I just wanted to underscore what you said, Brian. So Ludi Van Boel is the president of the International of ISPS. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for introducing me. But I really am interested in your work, Pesach, and I really liked your presentation because in Belgium we want to start a Soteria house also. Now we have a big group of family members and persons with lived experiences and professionals who are coming together regularly. And we have written a manifest to go to the government and to ask some money, but still we are in the prodromal stage. We don't have a house yet, but we visited a lot of houses already. Also in Bern, in Soteria Bern, we were with Champi. And there I was really impressed by the house, and I saw also a soft room for people who were very excited. And in that soft room, it is possible to guarantee a permanent being with. And my question is it also possible in your houses that there are soft rooms where people who need that permanent being with can go with one person for a whole night? Or I was wondering.
I think that our soft room isn't as developed as it should be, as it is in a Soteria Bern, for example. I also visited there during the lean years when I didn't yet have a Soteria. There are certainly many places in the home where one can be for a period of time alone or with a companion. Also, we often, before we would offer that, we suggest to the person to go for a walk. That together with the companion, and that has partly replaced the soft room. In the Jerusalem men's home, sort of in the first home I showed, where I wanted very much to make the point that in contrast to being on the outskirts of town next to the cemetery, we're now in the center of town. That was a wonderful point to make. I still have doubts if it's the right place to be when you want some peace and quiet, because it's not a quiet neighborhood. It's a center of town. And we are actually looking to move out now. There's just going to soon be a whole new spurt of building. So the place we're going to look for, I hope that there will be a more clearly designated soft room. But there are corners and rooms which aren't actually bedrooms, or where people can go when they just need to get away from it all. And also in the Jerusalem home, there's an underground water cistern. It's like the size of a large wedding hall. I mean, this was built from 1880s, before there was any kind of central plumbing to bring water. So the rainwater which you gather in the winter is what you have. And there isn't water coming in anymore, but this is huge area. Sometimes when visitors come, I like to joke that's our seclusion room. But usually they know not to take me seriously. But sometimes people like to go down there. It's a place where you can throw rocks and you can scream at the top of your lungs. They go by themselves. They go with one of our companions. The only entrance to the place is via a room which usually serves for meetings. And I remember having meetings once with some senior people in the Ministry of Health and trying to convince them of all sorts of things. And in the middle of the meeting, the window opens up and someone climbs into the room on his way out, on his way out from that cistern. And that made an impression. That made an impression, yes. Okay, and the role of the psychiatrist in a house. When a Soteria house works well, the psychiatrist is relatively marginal, certainly in the day-to-day. His presence is very important, and again, in being a companion to the companions and assuring them that things are under control, in being able to see any sort of emerging crisis which he might be able to detect. Though often the companion who's more who's more in contact on the front line will alert the psychiatrist, but the psychiatrist has to be able to know how to provide confidence to the people there. And of course, medication is something which it's usually the psychiatrist's input, but again, it's something which everyone now thinks about. Like I'll talk to the companions, of course, with the resident I'll speak, but also the companions. What do you think? Do you see some progress? Is he more into things? Can we stop increasing the dose and or something like that? So the psychiatrist should be well integrated into the way things are done. Yeah.
I was also impressed that less than 3% of the people were not able to stay in the houses, that you had to refer them to a hospital. Chompy told me that 15% of the people were not able to stay there. So
there are several reasons for that.
Yes.
You know, the first like 4 months that we opened the doors and started learning how to do this, the number was close to 50%, 50.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a wild time.
Yeah.
And every year it's less. 3%, I can tell you that, oh, we are so wonderful. We know how to treat everybody almost, and we do such great work. But it might also be that we're a little bit more careful about who comes in the first place, and that we're not taking on enough challenges. the staff get a little bit tired of me when they say, oh, wow, it's this guy who came in so difficult and we're having problems. And I say, oh, great. And I'm not being sufficiently empathic, but to the staff, that is. But it's interesting whether the 3% means that we're doing a great job or that we're not challenging ourselves enough. This is an ongoing discussion in the homes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And good luck in Belgium. Listen, if we can
but
help
we
you,
also-
come visit. We're not that far away as opposed to New
Yes,
York.
we would like to come to Israel, really.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the next person, Anne, was asking about working with families. You do use open dialogue, I know.
Yeah. We try to invite oh wait, does anyone want to ask herself?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Anne, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Good, hi.
So nice to see so many of you that I haven't seen in the midst of this pandemic. It's
Yeah.
great to be together. I actually had two questions. One was the one I posted, which is, do the families visit? Do you do work with the families? Do you address the social context in which people are living and deal with like their life circumstances and how to how to deal with their life circumstances? And then my second question is, since you've challenged the biomedical understanding of emotional distress, psychosis, how have you evolved in your understanding as to psychosis and emotional, difficulties, if it's not biomedical?
Okay, this is a very complex issue, obviously. In one sense, everything, I believe, all of our subjective experiences of every sort clearly has a neurophysiological infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. The question is, how do you try to help the person? Is it by working on that substrate or by working with the person? Every time you talk to somebody or listen to somebody, you're listening to me now, you're trying to understand what I'm saying. You assume I'm trying to say something, you're trying to figure it out. That's the way dialogue happens. It's only people who are diagnosed with some kind of serious psychiatric diagnosis that the psychiatrist listens, and what he's thinking is there hyperdopaminergic secretions in the mesolimbic system? What is the logical structure of his thought processes? And so on and so forth, and without trying to understand what the person is saying. So what the simple point is, which again, I think it should be obvious to anybody who hasn't gone through a certain kind of psychiatric education, is that the brains aren't psychotic, people are psychotic. And the way to try to help the person is by engaging the person on the level of a person. Before I got into Soteria, there was a period of time when I would do hypnosis and do research in hypnosis. Then I kind of expanded it by doing research on the placebo effect. And the placebo is a misnomer. The placebo is really any kind of psychosocial treatment which works top down. Any kind of method I have for encountering the person, and by my contact with that person, engendering a certain kind of health reaction, which physiologically percolates down through the whole organism. But but that's what I'm trying to do over here now. In this diagnosis, in this I'm sorry, in this definition of placebo, all psychosocial treatments are placebo, but I wouldn't call them placebo because that's become a pejorative term. So when I say it's not the biomedical model, what I mean in the simplest terms is that I'm not trying to do a reduction to the relevant brain areas. I'm trying to understand the person as people should always be understood, as trying to say something, as having some kind of motivations, as having some kind of meaning, even in the most seemingly incoherent utterances. And I think that by relating to people in that way, you can provide a lot of nurturing and emotional sustenance. You can disperse a lot of the terrible loneliness which affects so many people suffering from psychosis. A sort of built-in loneliness, because who can really understand them? Who can really bear to be with them with the intense sort of distress that they are feeling? So that's what I mean by not a biomedical model, but a more humanistic model that might be called biopsychosocial. I don't, if done right and properly understood, I don't have a problem with that term. R.D. Laing, certainly later in life, said he doesn't have a problem with giving medication if that's what calms the person down. But it's always clear that calming may be a necessary accessory in the treatment process, but it's not the point. I can give somebody a bit of benzodiazepine and help get him through the night, but I know I haven't really solved very much beyond that. But it's good that I helped him with that problem. Okay, this is the a prolegomena to a non-biomedical approach to psychosis, and I hope it's satisfactory for now.
We have a article in our journal on that very topic, A New Understanding of Psychosis. Jan Olof Johannesson and others collaborated on it. It's worthwhile looking in the Psychosis Journal for ISBS. Yeah, there's a ton of research showing not just psychotherapy with PET scans, functional MRIs, et cetera, showing what you were talking about, Pesach, with top-down processing and helping people make contact without being terrified of the contact, feeling ashamed and guilt and everything that goes, fear of hurting the other, everything that goes along with it, and helping people form secure attachments does wonders for our genes and brain. And that psychiatric symptoms work through, obviously, brain and genes, but not necessarily because of them. There's a lot of research on adverse social factors, the ACE study, etc.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Oh, there was one more question which he asked me about families. We strive to have weekly meetings with the person's support system, assuming the person agrees to this. And we try to do it with the principles of open dialogue in terms of not identifying the patient, and everybody is going through the process equally, and a polyphony of voices and opinions. That's how we try to maintain the meetings. There's no doubt that the principles of open dialogue are extremely compatible with the kind of thing that's done in a Soteria home.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alex wanted to reiterate something about the humanity. He had worked as a doctor in Europe and as a companion in Jerusalem at Soteria. Alex, did you want to speak about it?
I can say something very brief. Ironically, I'm speaking to you from the middle of a psychiatric hospital. I'm on call today. And it's very, very stark, the difference between the physical environment and the interpersonal environment here, and the physical and interpersonal environment in a Soteria house. It's obvious which one I would rather be in, both if I needed help and both if I'm giving help. So from my point of view, even though the Soteria model is not perfect, it cannot cope with, very violent or people with suicidal intent, very strong suicidal intent. It's still far more functional in any other imaginable way than a general hospital.
Alex, I'm so happy to see you. Why did you leave and go back to Malta?
Don't get me started.
I must say that having a companion who also happens to be an MD, but he's not yet recognized as an MD in Israel because he got it in Malta, has so many advantages. First of all, he's a doctor. He can take care of so many things. Secondly, I can pay him like a companion because he's not officially a doctor. And thirdly, Alex was such a pleasure to have working with us. He really got it. And I'm sure that, Alex, that you will survive your current psychiatric training and in some form or other come back to be a part of things as they ought to be.
The next, Sabish is thanking you, as many people are, and about the Soteria coming to New York. And this is a good question because you touched on this, and she'll probably, Sabish, is that a?
Yes,
Sabish?
I'm here. Yes, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dr. Prashant, for the presentation. Just wanted to know, I work in Harlem Hospital, City Hospital setting, and I'm also a candidate. But how do you adapt this for a city hospital setting? Many of these humanistic principles and insurance companies, and you've worked in New York, so any ideas?
Oh, wow. It's been frustrating when we have people who sometimes cannot come in because they don't want to, because they're violent, and the next day they're being admitted into an inpatient ward, a closed ward, and how can I get to them? So I've given a lot of thought to what you've asked. And even though there's an inherent contradiction, I mean, we are a place where in Soteria, where we would never coerce people to do anything. And you want to know how you're going to do this in a hospital where the doors are locked. I think the answer involves having a staff which is trained to listen, to try to be with the person. I would also here, if possible, try to use many of our companions of that type of person to provide an environment where people are being listened to be able to establish a connection by being available for the psychotic person. Research in many places in the world has shown that the amount of actual therapeutic time happening in psychiatric wards is measured in minutes, 12 minutes, 19 minutes. In Soteria, something is always happening. Whatever goes on is fed back into the therapeutic community and becomes grist for the mill, more opportunity to be able to work on something which can have significance. I think, and maybe I'll actually try to prove this at some point by going back into a hospital. This is a fantasy. And to be able to bring that kind of dialogical approach, that kind of respect, that kind of need to talk to people, even when you have to tell the person, listen, I cannot let you out of the ward. You've been placed here against your will. You can tell me what a lousy thing that is, but now let's proceed from here. Can this work? I don't know, but I have a very strong sense that there's this major part of the work that I'm trying to do, which I can't complete until I actually get to those people and see whether they can also be helped. And I think that the times, the situation, the cultures, the psychiatric culture is sufficiently changed, at least in my country, where people are much more receptive now to making this kind of experiment. So good luck in your city hospital, and feel free to consult. Maybe we'll go through this experiment together at some point.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'm glad Savish mentioned. I've been to Harlem visiting some of my patients. It's good knowing someone like him is there. John Strauss. John Strauss is with us. And John, are you there? You wanted to make a comment. You wanted, John?
You're on mute.
Yeah.
John?
No, it was a great presentation. I knew Lauren well, actually. We met first at the National Institute of Mental Health in the 60s. And I was very fond of him. I'm much more conservative than he was, but I loved his approach, and American psychiatry really needed and still needs that. I'm interested in terms of your program. For one thing, I think it just sounds wonderful what you're doing. But I'm wondering exactly in comparison with Lauren, you seem to be much more an establishment type in a way, and you get along better with the establishment. Lauren would, with big international conference, and he'd come on the stage with a cowboy hat or something like that. He was always doing stuff like that. And you seem much more compatible with the establishment. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does that hinder what you can do? Of course, the establishment for him may have been a lot nastier than the Israeli establishment too.
No comment on that point, but but first of all, I'm honored that you listened to my presentation. I'm familiar with your work. I think that David Roel was a student of yours, and I've read some of the work that you've written, and I'm really it's an honor to have you here listening to all that I've been saying now. This issue of being establishment or anti-establishment, I admit that I think about it sometimes. There was, as I said, early on, even before we set up the first house, there was a strategic decision that I'm going to make some sort of deal. I mean, this is always an issue. People want to change things. Do you do a revolution from the outside by destroying the system and doing something, or do you work from the inside? What I did was sort of halfway, but closer to working from the inside, in that I started on the outside when I set up the first Soteria home. I was very careful as far as possible not to burn any of my bridges with the establishment. Again, a professorship, head of a department. I had contacts I wanted to be able to use and have used. And it still aroused, especially in the beginning, it aroused a certain opposition, partly for which I was to blame, because sometimes I would make needlessly incendiary remarks, which Lauren Masher might have been proud of me for having made those remarks. But the point isn't to, the point is to help as many people as possible. And that means that I can't have just one or two houses. I really have to become a part of the system. And if that requires compromises, I will make them. I don't want to have a perfect ivory tower institution, which will be a single place, and everyone will say how wonderful it is, and they'll all respect it. But I'm after much bigger game. And that's why I'm also thinking about the idea of going back into the hospital, which is even further going into the heart of the establishment to be able to make change. I want to help as many people as possible. So this is what I do. I said I've made some mistakes. One of my I suppose one of my errors was when Robert Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic book was translated into Hebrew, they requested me to write the introduction. Someone on our board asked me to do that. I didn't want to say no, so I wrote it. And suddenly everybody understood that I was part of the enemy. It was needless of me to open up a second front in the anti-medication front. We do Soteria, when you do it right, you obviously need a lot less medication. No reason to be in your face about that. So these are things that we've learned and fine-tuned. And I can honestly say that I feel a part of the establishment. I'm happy the establishment is not the same place that it was when I started, and that's partly that's changing the zeitgeist, which is much broader than Soteria. It's a matter of a certain sobering reassessment of the progress made in psychiatry or lack of progress. Many of you may be familiar with Anne Harrington's work on the unfulfilled promises of biological psychiatry. I'm just trying to help as many people as I can, and this involves my cooperating wherever I can with the people in power. And I think that the results have been good. It means sometimes that I want to keep somebody in the home for 3 months. I have to send them home after 6 weeks. Yes, there are prices I have to pay, but in the broader scheme of things, I'm sure that this is the right tack to take here.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I just want to mention John's book on recovery with Larry Davidson and someone else, John Rakefeld, or I don't remember right now.
Well, Larry and I have done a lot of stuff together, so maybe it was that.
Great book, excellent book. Amy wants to ask you, because you mentioned drama therapy. She wanted you to describe it. Amy, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm very curious about the role that the drama therapy has, and to what extent it's kind of an isolated, session, or how much it's integrated into moments that just arise. And I'm assuming that, yeah, I'm also, well, I just want to hear what it's been for you guys.
Okay, the men's home in Jerusalem, the head of the men's home, Amir Herzog, is a psychodramatist, an MA. That is his identity as a mental health care professional. All the homes have psychodrama groups, which is a little bit different from drama therapy, as I'm sure you all know. They have psychodrama groups, but also it's become a sort of thing where someone says, I don't know what to do with my parents. Okay, why don't I play your mother? Why don't I play your father? This does often take off spontaneously. People have become quite used to the modality, and it's so wonderful to be able to enter different roles and imagine what it's like. And it's also a great path to empathy for the companions who see this happening. And yeah, I'm a great fan of what psychodrama can do.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Beverly wants to see if, Beverly, you're there, about your slides, and she wants to start a similar home in Australia. Beverly, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I'm very impressed with what is happening with Soteria House, and I'm very much pushing for better systems. I've been pushing for better systems in Australia now for more than two decades, ever since my daughter became sick. And I learned about open dialogue in 2011 when I went to Finland to visit Jaakko Seikkula to see what he had to say, and I had my daughter with me. And when I left there, well, I asked my daughter, "What do you think about this treatment?" And she said that, well, if I had that kind of treatment from the very beginning, I wouldn't be as sick as I am now. And I felt quite the same. And I spent 4 days also at Keropita Hospital as visiting psychologist. I could participate in everything, move freely in the hospital, and participated in clinical meetings with patients and family. And I was 100% sold for it. So I've been pushing for that ever since. And the one big problem in Australia is that the people who have been on medication, because everybody has been on medication, it's only by a medical model which has been here. And so since 2011, I've been pushing open dialogue. But now if you are on medication, there's no way you can go and be tempered off it under proper supervision. Like there are plenty of places you can go if you are on illegal drugs or tobacco, not tobacco, but there's even for tobacco, but for illegal drugs, you can go. But if you are on legal medications, which are drugs also, nothing. So I really feel that, well, this we need something like that, and perhaps Soteria House would be a kind of way of approaching the situation.
I encourage it very much. I remember we once had a young woman from Australia, and I was a bit astonished that she was coming to us because she couldn't find a similar service back home. So yes, you know, again, the zeitgeist. This is a time to try to establish these things. I think that the system, wherever you are, is probably going to be much more attuned to the possibility. And I don't think it needs to be presented as something anti. It's a legitimate service clearly for many people who need to be helped around the clock and have until now needed to go into a psychiatric ward. They can be better served in such a place. And every place whenever there's been a Soteria home, it's always had a beneficial, salutary effect on the surrounding mental health care environment. So yeah, by all means, these houses ought to proliferate.
Yeah, I think that in a way we are in a good place in Australia at the moment, because we got, and it was by philanthropic process that we got a research program started at Sydney University 2016 to research what produces positive outcomes for people with with schizophrenia. And we had this man, Professor Niels Boos, was employed from Denmark. He was aware of open dialogue already. And so he established a research program at Sydney University, had 3 places where he was doing it in community mental health centers. And he also then organized a 3-year training for all the staff in those in the centers where they participated in the program. And so now we have this first lot of 3-year trained, 2-year trained clinicians and 3-year trainers clinicians already in Australia. And we have just established a virtual open dialogue center here in Australia. So we have people who have that kind of training behind already and understanding. So I think that we might be able to get somewhere.
Good luck. Good luck. If I can help.
Good luck. That's what we need a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're coming close to the end, but I didn't see any other. I just quickly want to say the idea about not everybody can do Soteria House, but what you were talking about, Pesach, earlier, and others, being able to apply the principles. It's like what Julie found with her dissertation on therapeutic communities. They weren't having all the principles, but they some places were adopting some. When I was at the Psychiatric State Hospital working, we many of us privileged being with, and we would do our sessions out on the grounds, or I would take people in my car. We would go to a local cafe, just being with, and it was unfortunately people there 24/7, and you could stay longer periods of time and be with people in the seclusion room. When people had to go in, I would go in with them, and it helped. And the principles of what you've described, and Luc Ciampi about, basically reducing stress, right? And helping people to reconnect in safe ways, inside, outside, and going for a walk together, a jog together, movies together, so important. I just want to, I'm so impressed with your talk, Pesach, and I hope it has all these ripple effects that, we've seen with the meetings in ISPS. It's such a wonderful organization. And now Zoom, we can have people from other countries too, which is really good. And I would just like to thank you so much for all the work and for who you are. David Feinsilver, deceased good friend, would say the Mensch model here. We've just heard the Mensch model. And Marty Cyril would say, who's deceased, from Finland, Beverly, and Helsinki, would say, this is a miracle of everyday life. And I would say to everyone who is present, Kia ora, tena koutou katoa, greeting each of you, hey tangata, hey tangata. It's the people, it's the people. It's Maori expression. So
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pesach. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you to Brian. Thank you to ISPS. Very meaningful for me.
It's a great group.
Thank you so much.
Lee, did you want to say something quickly, or?
I hope that we can see you again in Perugia, that we can meet together. Yeah, thank you. It was really a rich presentation. Really.
The deadline for papers in Perugia is, Ludi, January 15th?
January 15, but I think there will be a lot later date also, but January 15 normally.
That happens. Oh, good. Okay, Julie?
Well, I think we did it. This was great.
What was that?
I said, this was great. I'm glad we finally did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Pesach.
Pleasure. Thank you very much to everyone.
See you in Perugia.
Looking forward.
Yeah. Rotterdam last, now Perugia, now on Zoom. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Take care, everybody, and stay safe. We're still in a pandemic.
That's right. Okay.
Okay, bye all.
Bye. I guess we can leave. Bye.